And joining me now is Republican Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina. Senator Tillis, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. We are grateful. I do want to start off by getting your reaction to the events that unfolded here at the White House Correspondents' Dinner last night. What are the key questions that you have this morning, Senator?
Well, I think the first observation is what an extraordinary job the Secret Service, local law enforcement, and other agencies that were there to protect not only the president and cabinet officials, but the people in attendance. I think it was a textbook execution. We owe all of those people who stood in harm's way a debt of gratitude. And hopefully I can convince some of my Democrat colleagues to get on my Protect and Serve bill, which would have increased the penalties for the perpetrator in this particular event. Hope to get that done before I get out of the Senate. But I think that, thank God, no one was hurt. Thank God the president is safe and everybody else who was there, including you. Yeah,
thank goodness for that. And thank you for that, Senator. I appreciate that very much. I do want to ask you big picture. I was just discussing this with the acting attorney general about FBI Director Kash Patel. His agency obviously will play a prominent role in this investigation. Again, The Atlantic reporting earlier this month that his tenure has been marked by what it calls, quote, conspicuous inebriation and unexplained absences. Now, Mr. Patel denies those allegations. Do you have confidence in Kash Patel to lead the FBI in this moment?
As you know, I was one of the people that led his confirmation and Judiciary Committee. This is one article. I work purely on facts and corroboration. When I see a corroboration, then I'm willing to have a discussion about these allegations. But at this point, look, I get hit with articles. Everybody gets hit with articles in D.C. and in politics. They've got facts out there. They've got witnesses. They want to lay them out. I'll take a look at it. But at this point, I'm not changing my position on the FBI director. I support him.
Okay. I want to ask you about political violence broadly. You are no stranger to it. Unfortunately, you've said you've been threatened so many times that it's like, quote, going to 7-Eleven and getting a gallon of milk. You were, of course, there when violence broke out on January 6, 2021, something that you have continued to speak out about. The president said last night that political violence is the cost of doing business now. Do you agree with that sentiment? And what can the country do about that, Senator?
Well, sadly, I agree with the president. I think he's right. I think the amplifier and the instigator of social media is able to really target vulnerable people. In many cases, we're seeing people who are committing these horrible acts have behavioral health and other challenges, stability issues in their lives. And now we have platforms that can focus on them, state actors, terrorist organizations fomenting hate in this country. What the American people need to do is take a breath, confirm their facts, talk to their elected officials, think of a bit before they judge people. They all have a role to play. And we in elected offices do as well. Our words matter, the weight of our words matter, and we need to be very measured in the way that we use them.
All right, I do want to turn to another big topic, a big headline this week, the Fed Chair. Of course, the Department of Justice on Friday announced it was going to close its investigation into Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. You had pledged to block the confirmation of Powell's successor, Kevin Warsh, until the investigation was dropped. U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro did not close the announcement or added this caveat with her announcement saying, quote, I will not hesitate to restart a criminal investigation should the facts warrant doing so. You just heard the acting attorney general effectively leave the door open to the investigation potentially being reopened. So let me ask you, will you now vote yes to confirm Kevin Warsh?
Well, let me back up. And the announcement on Friday was well received by me. I think it's the first time that the Department of Justice in D.C., or I should say the D.C. prosecutors, have acknowledged that they're not going to carry this case forward. The case is on appeal. But after that statement, I've had a number of discussions with the Department of Justice. They have made it very clear that the current investigation is completely and fully ended. There may be some confusion because they're moving forward with the appeal, but I have been assured by the Department of Justice that that appeal is simply to challenge the basis for judging on the motion to quash the subpoenas. It would not in any way constitute a basis for reopening the investigation. And we heard from Acting Attorney General Blanche just a few minutes ago that the only thing that would trigger an investigation is potential criminal misconduct identified by the Inspector General Horowitz, who's one of the most respected inspector generals in Washington or in the whole of government. I have studied this, and I believe that there will not be any wrongdoing. Maybe we find a little stupid here in terms of somebody responsible for the project making a decision they shouldn't, maybe. But it doesn't rise to a criminal prosecution. That was my problem to begin with, because I feel like there were prosecutors in D.C. that thought this was going to be a lever to have Mr. Powell leave early. But now with this, I am prepared, and with the assurances from the Department of Justice that the case is completely and fully settled, that the appeal would only be used to potentially abrogate or change the ruling for administrative purposes, not as a basis for reopening the investigation, and that the only way an investigation would be open would be a criminal referral from one of the most respected inspector generals there. I am prepared to move on with the confirmation of Mr. Warsh. I think he's going to be a great Fed chair.
I just want to put a fine point on it, because what you're saying is significant, Senator. You are now a yes to vote on the confirmation of Kevin Warsh.
That's right. We'll be putting out a statement. We worked a lot over the weekend to make sure that we were very clear that we had assurances from the DOJ that I needed to feel like they were not using the DOJ as a weapon to threaten the independence of the Fed. So this will allow Mr. Warsh to move on with his confirmation on time. And that's the absurdity of this whole thing. If this investigation, which is now closed, had never occurred, we wouldn't be having this discussion. He would have been confirmed on May the 15th. Fortunately, I think, or by May 15th, I think we'll get there. And then Mr. Powell will have to make his own decisions at some point in the future about when and if he leaves the board before the end of his 2028 term expiration. I suspect Mr. Powell wants to see what happens with the appeal and to make sure that it is fully settled after the appeal. It could be a lengthy process, hopefully not. And then we can move on and let the Fed be independent, because if we had allowed this to occur, I think it would have had devastating consequences for our financial systems and the markets worldwide. Thank God we avoided that.
So, and just to be clear, are you confident that Kevin Warsh will act independently of the president if he is in fact confirmed?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the president doesn't get annoyed with him once or twice. Look, the Fed body that determines rate hikes, that works on their dual mandate for employment and for inflation, it's a consensus-building body. You have 12 voting members. No one person can actually control it. You have to get a majority of it, and ideally, you get a supermajority. So Kevin's going to go in there with a great reputation, with past experience, with relationships with, I think, as many as 5 prior Fed chair boards. He's going to understand he's got to work on gaining consensus. The president's right to just press and press and press. I don't begrudge him for demanding that inflation goes down. We've got to deal with the affordability problem, and this president's trying to do it better than Biden and Obama ever did. But you've got to do it by the rules, and you've got to do it within the bounds of the institution so that we maintain this precious, exceptional gift that we have as a nation and the gold standard for a financial system.
Senator, let me turn now to the war in Iran, which approaches its 60-day mark this week. As you know, by law, the president needs congressional approval to continue the use of force beyond 60 days. Senate leadership doesn't have plans right now to put a measure on the floor authorizing the use of military force in Iran. At the end of these 60 days, do you think there needs to be a vote authorizing the use of military force in Iran, Senator?
Well, I think the only thing that's going to avoid pressure to do that is clarity from the White House, from the Department of Defense on what the strategic objectives are. If you go back to the War Powers Resolution. 60 days is roughly the amount of time we give the administration leeway to take action. And this is clearly to get to a lasting peace and to achieve the objectives of the president, which I support. It may take longer. So we need clarity on what that looks like. In fact, I think that if it's going to be a longer-term engagement, the authorization for the use of military force could demonstrate to Iran, this isn't just about the president in Iran. This is about the whole of the United States and the U.S. Congress supporting the president through an authorization for the use of military force for the long term, for as long as it takes to get to a lasting peace and a non-nuclear Iran.
And so would you vote in favor of authorizing military force in Iran if it were brought to the floor?
We would have to work with the administration. Clearly, this is not, we're not going to play the game that the Democrats have tried over the past couple of weeks doing these discharge resolutions on war powers. We want to be productive. We want to be supportive of the president. And to do that, we just have to be briefed on what the objectives are so that we can support that. Either support a formal extension, which is allowed under the War Powers Resolution, or build the support for the authorization, the use of military force. Democrats should come on board. We are fixing a mess that started with President Obama and continued with President Biden. They aided and abetted the ability of the mullahs in Iran to kill their people and to build their nuclear capabilities. This president, I've told him, is the first president who had the guts to act with the kind of power that's necessary to bring these hateful, deadly leaders of Iran to heel, and we've got to do everything we can to support them. But most people know I'm a by-the-book kind of guy, and we need to do it by getting clarity from the administration on what they need to do short-term, intermediate term, and long-term, and to what extent Congress can help, and get Democrats on board fixing problems that their predecessors created.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Senator Thom Tillis, thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.